When I was in high school, I began experiencing symptoms of depression, and I really struggled for a while. I saw all sorts of therapists and different treatments, and nothing helped. And in fact, I often felt like some of the therapies I pursued and people I spoke to made it worse. So I was like, I'm gonna fix this. I will cure depression.
She's coached CEOs and taught at Stanford, but behind the credentials, she's faced struggles that make her message even more powerful. Today, Dr. Caroline Fleck is here to share how you can turn pain and struggle into purpose and happiness.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Today, we are speaking with Dr. Caroline Fleck.
Dr. Caroline Fleck.
Caroline Fleck.
Stanford clinical psychologist.
She's very famous for this concept called validation.
Do you have a dark moment that you were able to turn into a really powerful lesson?
I definitely reached a point where I can say unequivocally now that I am grateful I suffered from depression. It was a very dark time. I'm grateful for that.
Wow. I really want to talk about not being able to create or destroy
I love that
energy.
concept.
What does this exactly mean, and how can we apply that mindset?
There's this intensity. It almost feels like this living thing. And being able to direct it makes you feel more in control. At this point, it's such a one-to-one. So I'll give you an extreme example.
Whoa. What would be some tips for how we can make others feel more seen, whether or not we are agreeing with them?
There's a couple of really easy ones that I'll just float out there. This one is if you disagree. If you're a teen and you're talking to your parents, usually the inclination is to point out that it's rude and obnoxious. If instead you think about what's their point and how would I do a better job of making that point, it will change how you listen.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Welcome, Dr. Fleck.
Thank you so much for having me. I was really going with the theme.
Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks. I'm Mercedes. And I'm Anastasia.
Thank you. I love it. Well, we're so excited to have you with us. You had a successful career as a psychologist and an author. So tell us a little bit of a backstory. How did you get here today, and what inspired you to pursue psychology as a career?
So academically, I was always much more of I was more interested in relationships than math. From a very young age. And then when I was in high school, I began experiencing symptoms of depression. And I really struggled for a while. And I saw all sorts of therapists and different treatments, and nothing helped. And in fact, I often felt like some of the therapies I pursued and people I spoke to almost made it worse. So I was like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to go get my doctorate and I will cure depression. I'll figure it out. I ended up recovering from depression, but my focus actually turned to a type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT. So that actually ended up becoming my passion, and I focused much more on that than the depression that motivated me.
I love that about your story, because I think so many people, whether adults or teens or anyone of any age listening to this right now, we all struggle, whether it is with something like depression, or maybe it's just something else that, we're going through in a season of our life. But I think what I love about your story is that, even when you were going through this period of struggle, you took that motivation to learn about yourself and your challenge and make an impact and make a positive change for yourself and for others. And I think that's so empowering that if you're struggling with something, don't become a victim to it or feel bad about it. Instead, try to find a way to fix it, whether for yourself or even for more people, whatever that might look like.
I think that's a really astute point, and I want to just piggyback off it a little bit. In that, I said I was going to figure out how to cure depression. I don't know how much I actually believe that, but what I did believe, what I was very clear to me then and still is that having been there and been through it, I felt like I could be useful to people in a way that so many of the therapists I'd seen were not. There felt like such a power differential. I felt like therapists were often kind of judging me, looking down on me. It didn't feel helpful. I didn't feel seen. I most often felt left feeling invalidated. And I thought okay, maybe I'm not going to come up with like, the most effective treatment of all time, but for the people I work with, I can see them having been somewhere similar, and I'm willing to lead with that. And to me, that felt different, and I knew I could bring that. And so I think it is about like, all right, this suffering can't be for nothing, right? And like, it's up to me to figure out what that means or how to find meaning in it.
I love that. I think it's so beautiful to turn a problem into a passion because, you have that energy behind it. And I think it's so beautiful.
And that understanding.
Absolutely. And I think it's so beautiful how you mentioned that maybe you're not going to be able to solve depression, but you know that you can make an impact on every one of your clients' lives, which is so important. And knowing that, your reach doesn't have to reach the whole world, but just the select group of people.
And I just have a quick question, because I know you mentioned that now you focus more on DBT. Is that so? Could you tell us? Because I'm not that familiar with it. What exactly is it?
Yeah, DBT, it's a dialectical behavior therapy, and it was a treatment initially designed for folks who have a condition called borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by a lot of emotion dysregulation, or, kind of big emotional responses, and then also, unfortunately, high rates of self-harm and suicidality. And so for the longest time, this patient population was considered untreatable. Like, we just did not have any interventions that worked for them. And unfortunately, as a result, they became very stigmatized within the healthcare system. And what DBT did was it introduced these set of skills, these validation skills, to help therapists communicate acceptance while also helping folks change. And so the motto of DBT is, you're doing the best you can and you need to do better. And both of those things can be simultaneously true. Prior to that, the rhetoric was much more along the lines of, you need to do better. And there wasn't a whole lot that said, it makes sense that you're here and that you're struggling, and that you're accepted unconditionally as you are. So it was combining those approaches that proved to be effective.
I love that. I think it's so important to give support and, come from a point of understanding, but also have that motivation and tell them to, it's okay, you can keep going and you can do this, but you are doing great as you are.
100%.
And I love how you mentioned something earlier about feeling seen and how you didn't feel seen when you were going to different therapists and doctors. So the feeling of being seen by others is so important to you and to us and to really everyone as humans. But what does it actually mean to feel seen?
Yeah, as therapists, so the way that we do that, the way that we we use what's called validation skills. So validation basically communicates that you're there, you get it, and you care. It is a signal of acceptance that culminates in the other person feeling seen. And we've developed over the years a handful of skills to make sure that we can, as therapists, communicate that even when we don't agree, frankly, even if we don't even like the person across from us, which in my experience has been just transformative to figure out how you stay engaged and constructive with folks, regardless of what they bring to the table. And the other fascinating thing about these skills is that they then help us cultivate. They work in both directions. So I'm validating the other person, they feel seen. The effect on me in using these skills is that I start to understand more. I start to empathize more. I am able to focus on what's valid, even if 2/3 of what I'm hearing or seeing is not, right? And that is a real skill because we are wired as human beings. We have this big, fat negativity bias, and we want to focus on what's wrong and what we disagree with and the threat. And so it is a skill to be able to zoom out and look at more of the picture. And frankly, it's just become so apparent to me, given the politics of today, how desperately we are in need of that capacity. We need to start teaching this at a much younger level, or age. You should not need to get a PhD in clinical psychology to master these skills. That's insane. And yet it's just not out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting because it's so true. I don't think we talk about or get taught enough about this kind of negativity bias, but it's true. Like we always find, I don't like this person because of this one thing, rather than concentrating on the 10 or 15 things that we have in common or that we might align on, even just a bit. And I really like what you said about, like that back and forth of validation. And so kind of for our audience who are teens, at that younger age, what would be, and their parents, what would be some tips for how we can kind of make others feel more seen, whether or not we are agreeing with them?
So there's a couple. Again, I've got all these different skills. There's a couple of really easy ones that I'll just float out there for you guys. This one is if you disagree. Okay. So if you're a teen and like you're talking to your parents, let's say, and they're saying a bunch of things that are obnoxious and rude in your opinion, the strategy, usually the inclination, is to point out that it's rude and obnoxious and focus on that. If instead you think about what's their point, like what are they trying to say, my parents, and how would I do a better job of making that point? If you play that game in your head, you just try and answer those two questions, it will change how you listen. It will point you away from coming up with your rebuttal or your counter argument, because your brain can't do two things at once. It can't both try and figure out the message here and do a better job of making it, make it more concise, and come up with a rebuttal and a defense. And when you switch in that direction and you start, really trying to hear the other person, it fundamentally changes the course of the conversation. It changes your tone. It changes the questions you ask. It has an effect on what you say and how you react. So that's a really easy one. Another super sneaky easy one is copying, which sounds weird when I say this, to actually copy the body language or specific words that people use in talking to you. But it is tremendously effective at signaling connection. So believe it or not, when we're attracted to people or they're in positions of power and we want to impress them, we naturally copy. Okay. It's a way that we signal kind of we're in the same tribe. And the research on this stuff is wild. It has all sorts of positive effects, again, in both directions. And it influences behavior in all sorts of ways. Like people who are copied, if a waitress, for instance, or a waiter, server, reads back the order from people who had just ordered, those folks are going to leave significantly higher tips than if their order had not just been repeated. So it has all these little effects on our behavior and our sense of connection. And it's just, the problem is when we're feisty and angry, we tend not to copy. Okay. We don't feel connected to the other person, and that's reflected. And oddly enough, those are the moments where it would obviously serve you most. So those are just a couple of fun ones.
That's incredible. I think it's so fascinating how it's the small things that really make the biggest differences. Like, I think for me as a teen, or for anyone of all ages, like whether you agree with someone or not, you want to, appeal to your friends and you want to make them feel good and seen and valid. And so I think like even repeating back something your friend said, or like if they're like, meet me at noon, you can be like, sounds good, I'll see you tomorrow at noon, or something like that. Like, I think it's those small little adjustments that just show like intention, and they take intention is really powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really, really love the idea of, trying to, instead of come off at a point of like opposition and defense and be like, this is why you're wrong, and almost like you said, building a rebuttal, but instead coming at like a point of understanding, and almost if you were kind of joining their side, even if you're frustrated and that you're kind of against what they're saying, or maybe it's the way they're saying it, but trying to find out, why are they actually saying this to me? Like,
Yeah.
clearly they are passionate about something. Maybe it's your mom telling you to do your homework and you're frustrated because you need to take a break because it's been a long day. But you can also come at her perspective and see that she's telling you that because she wants you to have good marks and do well in school because she cares about you and she loves you. And I feel like when we try to view it from their side, we can start to understand why they're acting the way they're acting.
Yeah.
And let me just be super self-promoting. Like, yeah, you'll be able to see their perspective. That'll be nice. You're also just going to be way more effective. So if you want someone to back off, I mean, again, these strategies were developed in a treatment for folks who were considered untreatable, folks who it was really hard to influence in any way. And that's what these skills helped us do. So if you want someone to listen to you, to respect your position, and even to take your advice, you're much more likely to get there if they feel like you're part of the same tribe. Okay? That's just like 101 on how to influence people. Another quick note on the copying, because you were mentioning, like, if someone says, okay, I'll meet you at noon, watch for emojis and punctuation, like if the person uses a lot of exclamation points, and the lengths of their response or responses in text messages, threads, and emails, like those are all signals of like, that's their language. That's how they speak. And if you're attuned to that, again, they hear you better. You're speaking in terms they understand. So it's another just little thing to look out for.
Absolutely. And it makes them feel good too, right? Because when we feel seen, we feel like happier and we feel like this is a good person in our lives, especially if like it's a friend or someone who we're working alongside. But on that note of the importance of feeling seen, if someone's listening to this and they feel like, yes, I can put that effort into, making my friends feel seen or making my schoolmate or coworker feel seen, what about if we don't feel seen? Like if I don't feel seen, do you have any tips for how we can seek out that feeling for ourselves?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to orienting the other person to what you need. I choose to believe that folks genuinely want to help. And even when they're being obnoxious, I don't think they're malicious or out to get me. And so just saying like, I just need to hear that I'm just checking to see if this is reasonable. Or I don't really need solutions right now. I just need to vent. Just giving people cues, because what's really fascinating is that when folks come to us with a problem, 2/3 of the time we offer problem solving. Okay. When we go to people for a problem, 2/3 of the time what we're seeking is validation. So we don't even give what we're actually typically seeking in these situations. We're no better than anybody else. But with that little pointer, like, hey, you're going over here, I need something over here. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but just knowing that they've got their problem-solving hat on, that goes a long way. And then if you get like really advanced in your relationships and you have this language of like, I just need validation, and there's no judgment in that, very powerful. But people get really funky when you start bringing up the need for validation, because we've been taught that external validation is very bad and very needy. It's not, but that's what we've been told.
Bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our Happiness Activity Box mission, Small Bits of Happiness. This Happiness Activity Box has got 100 unique, fun things to do to feel happier daily, including conversation starters, reflection prompts, recipes, DIYs, and beyond. So Anastasia, why don't you pick a card and let's do it together. Just pick out a card. You can do it around the dinner table, in the mornings, with family, with friends, solo, to learn more about yourself.
So this is listen to an upbeat song. And the best part about it is that there's actually a QR code on the card, and so if you want to listen to some music but you're not exactly sure what song to put on, you can scan the QR code and it'll take you to a playlist, which will definitely boost your mood.
And a lot of the cards have QR codes taking you to our website to explain more about why this activity brings you happiness. And then once you listen to the song, we're going to place it behind our Mission Accomplished tab so that you can keep track of all of your missions as you accomplish them. You can shop the Mission Small Bits of Happiness activity box now. It makes for a great gift as well as a great activity for people of all ages to connect with your family or with yourself, linked in the show notes.
Now let's get back to the episode.
That's so interesting.
That's so
And
fascinating.
I like your point on the external validation, because I think it's true. Like, there's so much talk about have self-validation, like you shouldn't have to post online or, get that from someone at work or school or in your life to feel like you're good enough or feel like you've accomplished something or like you're a nice person or your problem is a genuine problem. And I think it's kind of interesting that you say that external validation is still very important, because I think that's definitely kind of our natural feeling. But to what degree would you say is it important to be kind of able to validate yourself, like, oh, I am smart, I accomplished something really cool, or, I deserve to be here, or something along those lines?
Yeah. So let's be super clear, right? A validation communicates acceptance. Every single person deserves to feel accepted. And we love to make this distinction between self and other. Oh, I shouldn't rely on others for external validation. I shouldn't rely on others for love or whatever. That is, according to all of the research, a very ignorant perspective, because we treat ourselves the way we have been treated by others. Folks who come from highly invalidating environments are not the pinnacles of self-worth and self-confidence. On the contrary, invalidation correlates highly with self-harm, suicidality, just about every mental health condition you can consider. So it's hard to separate the two. And yet, if you're not in a situation, if you're not exposed to or in relationships with people who validate you, you can develop those skills, but you're going to have to work harder at it because it hasn't been modeled for you. Where the heck would you have learned that? Right? And so it needs to be more of an intentional practice. Like, I do a self-validation practice every night, and I think it needs to be something I know it needs to be something along those lines if this is going to become ingrained at all, because you're working against what is being modeled for you and what you're learning. So you need to supplement your learning, so to speak.
I'm so curious. What is your validation nightly routine?
Yeah.
So it goes through pretty much the same ladder of skills that I would use in validating others. I just turn them inward. So there's a couple of components to it. First, I'm just usually you just got that little unrest. Maybe it feels like anxiety or something. And I try and locate okay, what am I feeling? So the first thing you need to do is identify the emotion. Once you've got that emotion, let's say it's guilt, your brain's going to bombard you with all these stories about why you are horrible and you suck and you're the worst person and you should feel guilty. What I want you to do, what I do, is I just try and feel the emotion in my body. I do not feed it with the narrative. So once I've identified an emotion, I'm not allowed to get into storytelling or look at where it's coming from. I just try and feel it as intensely as I can, which sounds scary. People are like, won't you have a panic attack? And actually, no, quite the opposite. That emotion will come up and it will go down so long as you're not feeding it. It's almost a meditation practice where you're just feeling like you're squeezing out a sponge, trying to feel it as intensely as you can, and it wrings out. And once you've had that experience of it going up and it's come down a bit, then you're in a position to look at, where is this feeling coming from? Why? Or this behavior, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Why do I feel this way? And you have to trust that there is a valid reason, and it's not that you suck. Okay, we need to chase down the chain of cause and effect. Maybe it's that people's expectations of you are high. Maybe it's that you had higher expectations for yourself. Maybe it's that this is what's been modeled. This is all you've ever seen is conflict. And so, yeah, you found yourself in conflict again. Whatever, you find that path. And that's kind of the finding the understanding piece of it. And then last but not least, again, something that's very counterintuitive, is that you respond to yourself as you would a friend. Like if your friend was crying, you wouldn't be like, you suck so much. You would make them tea or comfort them in some way. So in bed, which is typically where I do it, I'll often put a hand to my heart or a hand to my stomach and breathe and just really say you're okay. You're okay. This is hard. And then last but not least, the most critical piece is you get to determine how this will make you stronger. And so I look at whatever that emotion is as fuel. And energy is never created nor destroyed, but it can be channeled. So if I don't channel it outward, it often digs inward and starts to hurt more and more. But I'll use that as motivation to do like a loving kindness meditation, or I'll set an objective for tomorrow. Like I'm going to wake up in the morning and text this person, I love you. Just one thing that I would not have done were it not for that experience. And it's like, it feels really cleansing. Like, honestly, guys, it feels like taking a shower. Like you've just kind of, I don't know, I guess it's what it is to process the emotion or the experience.
I love that so much. I know definitely I'm going to try that tonight.
Me too.
But I feel like it's really beautiful because it's like taking a step back and validating what you're feeling in that moment. Because I feel like what we oftentimes get caught up in is that we feel like if we want to be the best version of ourselves, we can't feel quote unquote like negative emotions like guilt or sadness. And that way we don't even try to get to the root of it, and eventually it comes out in a negative way that we can feel guilty about. And then I also really like how you mentioned that you wait for it to finish spiking, because it can be so easy to then go into that narrative and feed into it. But then as soon as those emotions pass over, we're able to then actually think clearly. And that way we can actually figure out why it happened. And I feel like it's kind of like a trust the process. You need to know that the feeling will fall. But I love that. I think that's such a beautiful
it's kind
way
of
to
like
explain
that.
it.
It's kind of like that saying of like emotions are information. Like you feel guilty, why? And your exercise is it's like such an actionable way towards finding out why and then doing something about that. And I really want to talk about that that aspect of not being able to create or destroy
I love that
energy, because I know
concept.
that that's something that you've talked about a lot in the past, and I'm glad you brought it up. What does this exactly mean, and how can we apply that mindset of energy is not created or destroyed to daily life outside of the self-validation practice?
I mean, I think this actually comes kind of full circle, as we're talking, back to that experience I had with the depression, right? Where it was, I think anyone who's ever struggled, I don't care if it's anxiety, any type of mental health thing, there's like this intensity. It almost feels like this living thing. And being able to direct it makes you feel more in control. And I think that was part of what helped me very early on. And it's just, at this point, it's such a one-to-one. So I'll give you an extreme example. It's a little dark, but I was diagnosed with breast cancer right after finishing the book. And I was devastated. Obviously I was devastated, but we were going to need, it was worse than they thought. We were going to need chemo and radiation and all this stuff. And it was so, it was just the most overwhelmed emotionally I'd been. And typically I channel that stuff into therapy and connecting with folks, but I felt too vulnerable. I just couldn't with people. And so my first inclination, I said to my husband, Matt, we've got to go foster some kittens. Let's go to a shelter, a kill shelter, and let's find some cats to foster. And it was the only thing that made sense to me in that moment was I need this to motivate me to do something that I wouldn't have done that is going to objectively improve some other creature's experience. And I don't care if it's even just a plant or whatever, but I am going to make meaning out of that. And so we did. We got these 2 kittens to foster. Of course, we adopted them. But I see their adorable little faces every day now. And I don't know, there's something in that for me.
I love that so much. I feel like it's so powerful to know that your negative energy can be then converted into something powerful that will affect you positively, as well as someone else or another, a cat or a dog or just something that you care about.
Even less extreme, but our podcast and our whole business, Moments of Happiness, we started because of the struggle that we noticed within ourselves and our friends and our peers, and even just the statistics of the struggles of, COVID on teens, and being a teen in general is not always an easy time. And so that kind of struggle we turn into a purpose. And I think that's just another example, right? And I think anyone can find that.
I mean, even and it's not, I always wanted to, I like to have it be other focused, but often if it's a breakup or something, I'll be like, this is going to make me stronger. Legit, every time I think about this dude, I'm going to do push-ups. And I am going to be physically stronger as a result of this heartache. So I think it's just about finding a way to channel it that is in the direction of your values and becomes fuel. That can move you instead of weight that weighs you down and makes it harder for you to reach them, I think.
I love that so much.
Yeah.
I also like to usually if I'm feeling a really big emotion is just to let myself feel it and then being able to say, okay, now I can use this positively, but you can't just take that negative energy and then try to do something positive in the meantime, because it can just feel
That's why your method is so incredible.
You
I love it.
need to feel it and then let it go.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say on that process though is say you've done it, you felt your emotion, it's coming down. Now you're examining, where did this come from? Why do I feel this? And then if it starts to heat up again, it means you're getting into the narrative. It's a really good sign that up, your story's getting away from you. You need to go back to just feeling. And so it's this little self-regulation mechanism that's super fun.
I love that. And if you feel comfortable, I know we really appreciated you being so vulnerable with us. But do you have a dark moment that you were able to turn into a really powerful lesson?
I've had, a few with the cancer in particular. I think that's the most salient to me because it's the most recent. But I definitely reached a point in my career where I can say unequivocally now that I am grateful I suffered from depression. And it was bad. It was really bad. And it was over a decade and it was a very dark time. I'm grateful for that. It has helped more people than I think it hurt ultimately. I know that I haven't quite gotten there with cancer. And so oddly enough though, that feels motivating to me. I don't feel resentful. I feel inspired, I guess, by that. I know I've got my kittens and, I've talked a lot about it on podcasts and stuff, but it hasn't been, all of that energy hasn't been channeled yet. And so that feels very bright to me, weirdly enough, that I know there's more there.
I love that. Thank you so much for being so open and vulnerable with us. I think it helps other people, whether they're going through something like depression or cancer, or maybe it's even just a breakup or feeling lost in life.
Just about
there's
school.
Something good that can come from it if you channel it in the right direction. And I think that your message is just the epitome of that. And I'm really grateful for that. And I absolutely agree. I think that, being able to channel something like depression into helping others is just the ultimate example of it.
And it's guaranteed that we're going to be going through something difficult.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to be breast cancer, but we're always going to have obstacles in our way. And
Yeah.
if we can learn from them so we can become better at dealing with it or even improve our own life and the lives of others around us, then it's worth it.
Yeah.
So worth it. If I could add just one more thing, because we quickly talked about the seeking external validation and how that's different. I think what folks are often confusing validation with in these discussions is praise. And so, for instance, a lot of what we get on social media is essentially praise. And praise is a judgment. It's a positive judgment, but it is a judgment nonetheless. It says, good job. I like the way you look. That's hot. That's hilarious. Okay. It says you met or exceeded expectations. Praise is fine. I mean, it's great. But yeah, if you seek it extensively, you will actually end up having to distort yourself, to filter yourself, to overachieve, to push it in order to meet or exceed expectations. Validation sends a different signal. It says, I accept you independent of how you look or perform. I see very little external validation on social media. I see very few signals of, hey, zoom out. I want to see the whole space, right? That's really, I find that very interesting. Hey, why did you pick? Like, I just don't see much of that. And so I want folks to understand, yeah, a lot of what we're seeking is praise. And that getting up and seeking that day in and day out is going to make for a very shallow and problematic life if you OD on it. Okay. But beneath that, what we ultimately want is to feel like we belong and that we're accepted. And praise is not the path to that. It'll lead you astray. And so those are very different kind of messages. Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, well, thank you. I like that.
clarification.
I like that example, that differentiation between praise versus external validation, because I think it's so true. So often we see people posting online and we're like, oh, I don't want to, rely on external validation, or I don't want to have to feel like, in order to be good enough, I need others to tell me that I'm good enough. But that's external validation. That's like what we've labeled it as, like a society. But it's true that distinction is essential, and that realizing that's actually praise, and external validation is just being able to like see both sides of something and make someone else feel seen for who we are, not, what we're doing or what we look like. And I think that that's a very important distinction. So I thank you for making that for us.
Sure thing.
I know your latest book, Validation, features an 8-level validation ladder, which I think is so cool. So to anyone who hasn't yet read the book, could you share a small teaser about the book or the ladder that's in it?
Yeah. So the ladder includes these 8 skills that I learned in becoming a therapist. This is the stuff that I was like, why aren't we teaching this in 3rd grade? Like, why? I was in like my 3rd year of my doctorate at Duke, and this is how I got this information. So it teaches those exact same skills that therapists learn, using the same teaching strategies that were used to train to everyday folks. And I talk about how you can use these skills in all sorts of different dynamics and relationships, including, as we discussed a little bit, in relationship to yourself. And so I need to emphasize, though, that this is like a skill set. It takes intention and practice. And if you are up for it, and you actually do the work, there's no doubt in my life that it'll be in my life. There's no doubt in my mind that it'll be transformative for your life.
Amazing. Well, I definitely think everyone should check out the book.
Absolutely.
And I think it's interesting how, these essential skills are not being taught at a younger age I guess you would be more malleable and able to kind of obtain them easier. I think it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And I just kind of wanted to pull back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier when we were doing the validation reset. And you were talking about getting stuck in the narrative and kind of getting stuck in our heads, because I feel like this is something that a lot of teens and young adults struggle with, because I know it can definitely be really hard and it's really easy to fall into that pattern. But what would be your advice for getting out of our head and kind of grounding ourselves?
Especially if it's like kind of, I feel like it's one thing when you're having like that reset moment that you intentionally step into, but if you're like at school or at work or, in a meeting and you're really kind of
in a sports game.
Yeah, you're really kind of spiraling within your own thoughts, what would be your advice for someone in that kind of situation?
Yeah. So what's needed there is some level of emotion regulation. Like if you're really, like, I think of that sometimes as just like a tornado, and if it's sucking you in, you need like another force that's more powerful to pull you out. And it's not going to be more thoughts. Okay. We have this idea that we're going to like figure it out and like solve the reason X happened or we did Y. Like, you're not. Okay. If it's hurting, if the thought process is hurting, it's not probably helpful. Okay. So if it's really spiraling in that way, I'd encourage folks to do more physiological regulation. The 3 skills we recommend are temperature, intense exercise, and pace breathing. So temperature is like the ice dive stuff. A cold plunge is a classic example, but in DBT, we would have folks put their head in cold water. Ice packs. I do a lot of consulting here in Silicon Valley, and I've got all these execs and CEOs walking around with like ice packs to their head before they go out and do their TED Talks just to kind of regulate their nervous system. Another sneaky one is intense exercise. I would do like push-ups until you can't think straight, squatting on a wall until you can't think straight. If you're in conversation with somebody, stand on your toes. You'll notice that some people do this naturally when they're nervous, and I think it's an unconscious effort to regulate, because if you squeeze those muscles, you will start to get distracted from the experience, and then you will start to kind of down-regulate once the exercise is done. So I highly recommend those strategies. But yeah, don't try and riddle your way out of it. It's never going to work.
Yeah, it's kind of
Absolutely.
like thinking your way through a puzzle, like it's not going to work out.
And you mentioned paced breathing as well. What is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is like, I might do, I would do one hand on my stomach and one hand on my chest, and I just try and breathe in for 3 and breathe out for 4. Keeping my chest still, filling up my tummy with air. It's so simple. It sounds almost hokey and new agey, but the science is solid. This stuff helps. You just have to do it and do it consistently and practice doing it on easier stuff when you're not too flooded. Like when you're anxious going into a test, but not like in the middle of the test where you're like, it's all falling apart. I remember nothing. For that one, just like, you can work up to that, but start with lower level stuff.
Yes, totally. And this kind of reminds me about that idea of box breathing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's another technique.
I know that we had a Navy SEAL on Work Denver, and he was telling us about box breathing, and so this reminded me of that. I think it's such a great technique to like have in the back of your mind if you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed.
Totally. I do this secretly in sessions because like oftentimes I have folks who come in really hot, and often that heat is directed at me because I'm challenging them. And I will find myself all of a sudden feeling very defensive or on guard. And so I do this, like they can't see me, but I put like very subtly, I'll put one hand on my chest and one on my stomach, and I'm just literally focusing on my breathing, barely listening, just regulating.
I also feel like one thing about that is very comforting because it's like you have, it's like almost like you're controlling like your pulse or something, like you're helping yourself calm down. And I feel like that's also like such a great way because it's like you almost feel less alone because you realize that like you're not just like stuck in your head. Like you have like a physical body and you're reconnecting with your physical body.
Exactly.
It's a biofeedback process. Absolutely. I mean, and it also gives you a sense of control. Because physiologically in those moments, even if you don't realize it, you're feeling out of control. Your sympathetic nervous system is getting more and more activated. So as soon as you take the reins, there is this like overwhelming sense of I'm in charge. And that in and of itself fosters regulation.
Totally. And I think that on another note of being able to overcome those challenges or those struggles that we have, big or small, I think sometimes it can be difficult for anyone of any age, especially teens, to speak up about, struggles that we're going through, even if it's just like to a family member and talk things out, even though getting that validation is helpful. It can be hard to like get to the point where we could get validated. So what are your top tips for communicating our struggles to others?
Okay, a couple of thoughts here. One, I've noticed that folks really tend to like invalidate themselves when they're struggling. And so there's this real like, it's not that bad. Or the assumption is if I were to tell somebody this, like it doesn't sound that bad. Right? Oftentimes folks will actually exaggerate the conditions, the situation to get the validation they're seeking, right? To have people understand how chaotic it feels inside. And so again, I'm all about signaling. Like, so saying to the other person, I'm worried that this seems trivial, but it's really weighing on me. Or I don't feel like I can handle like problem solving, or I'm not looking for solutions on this right now. I just want to hear if this sounds reasonable to you. I'm honest, I'm telling you guys, if you cue people, they will respond with what you're seeking, especially teens. And I remember this vividly as a teenager, like wanting folks to mind read and like, they should know that I am pissed or I am upset. And if he really loved me, he would know, or she would know, or what have you, or they would know. And I have come to such a different place in my life that like, I do not expect people to understand. I really, really don't. It is on me to communicate effectively. It is not on them to guess what I need or what I'm feeling. I think there's some taking responsibility for that is actually empowering.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like we can kind of control that aspect of the narrative of like what we want or even what we need. Like, can I just talk to you, or do you have any advice for this?
Yeah.
Is so empowering, just knowing that like sometimes the best way to get out of your own head is also just to share that with someone.
Exactly. And I know sometimes it's like, for me especially, it's like if I'm not feeling well in the moment, like physically, like if my stomach hurts, and I'll be telling like my mom or my dad about it, and like all of a sudden the stomachache goes away, and I'm like, wait, so now I feel like I'm lying. But it's like just 2 minutes ago I was like, I feel so unwell. And so just knowing it's like that, now that I'm getting in my head about it, it doesn't take away from how well I felt 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. We also do this thing where like, especially women, I think we've come a long way in like that we're not waiting for some Prince Charming to like rescue us from the, like we can make our own. But I often see women still waiting for like an emotional Prince Charming who can like swoop in and rescue them from their negative self-talk. Or it could be like, I mean, it doesn't have to be gender specific, but just like someone who swoops in and rescues you from yourself. And I think it's such a mistake, and you're just going to be so disappointed in people. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of disappointment.
Are you looking for the best, unique, and meaningful gift to give to anyone in your life? Mercedes and I have been loving our subscription to the meditation app, Waking Up. It is so amazing. It has so many different meditations that you can try and listen to. And the best part is they even have different episodes that you can listen to that talks about why meditation is so important and can really help you out.
As the countdown to the holiday season, birthdays, or other special occasions embarks, grab a 12-month-long, yes, a full year subscription to Waking Up and save $30 off the first year by clicking the link in our show notes.
Now let's get back into the episode. And I want to talk about feeling more empowered as a person, because I feel like a really big part of feeling empowered is sort of like a self-acceptance, because we know who we are, but we also support it and we love ourselves. Why is acceptance so important to us as humans?
Yeah, there was some great work by the social psychologist Mark Leary, and he, I think, was among the first to acknowledge or really explore the extent to which we as human beings, we need to feel accepted and like we belong. If we want to torture people in this country, we do it through isolation. Being cut off from other people, from the tribe, is incredibly punishing. It affects our mental development and our ability to self-regulate. It affects us in ways we don't even understand. And so I think you need to appreciate that desiring that is not weak. It's not shallow. It's not needy. It is understandable. And more importantly, if you don't feel that sense of belonging, that hurts. Okay? And there's nothing wrong with you for feeling like that hurts or for wanting it. I think we really shame ourselves, but you need to look at acceptance as essential to us as food or water, because it is that essential to our mental health, feeling a sense of belonging and acceptance.
It's so true. I think that this is why so many of us as teens, we, especially peer pressure is obviously at any age, but, we want to make our friends like us and include us and invite us to whatever they're doing, because being alone is like, so stressful. And I think it's interesting to hear like that research on like how this affects us even in ways we may not understand at a high level, because you know, it's just kind of an innate aspect of like we want to feel accepted, and don't feel bad for wanting to, you know, have a tribe, have a group of people who love you and accept you. But also I think it's important to like be specific with picking who that tribe is, making sure it's people who actually contribute positively to your life rather than people who like make you influenced to do not so great choices or thoughts.
Yeah, that's the problem with acceptance, right? Is that we do need it. And so if we're not getting it from healthy relationships or, you know, positive dynamics, we'll take it from negative ones, right? And like that's it, that it's just something to be mindful of in like your self-awareness. It's not a weakness, but it's something you need to be aware of, right? Because you will settle for poor relationships over no relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. And on another bit of a note, I know you mentioned how you've done consulting around Silicon Valley, and I've heard that you've worked with many incredible Fortune 500 companies, helping employees and staff build resilience. So what's one of the biggest lessons that you teach these top companies?
Praise the work, validate the person. So in corporate America and in professional situations, we tend to focus on the output, and we're very like, good job, nice work, you killed it, that was, you know, excellent, all of which is praise. We are much more hesitant to couple that praise or supplement it with validation, which acknowledges the person's experience. So it's one thing to say, great job, like you really, this was awesome. And it's another to say, you delivered this on an incredibly tight timeline with half the staff you expected to have because the other half went on, you know, medical leave for various reasons. And you did it. That's awesome, right? So that validation combined with praise really lands, especially at work, because people aren't expecting it. And they're fighting so hard for their managers, their bosses, their stakeholders to see what their experience is. Yeah, that would be probably my biggest tip.
That is so interesting, and I think we can apply that beyond companies as well. Like even if you're talking to like a friend, you can be like, wow, you know, you've done such a great job on organizing this event, even though, you know, I know that you've had a lot going on lately, or that, you know, there was a lot of moving parts and some people maybe came last minute or, you know, changed something at the last minute. Like that is such a great example of how we can kind of extrapolate that.
And I feel like it's so beautiful because it's really focusing more on the person than on the work itself. So it's really highlighting that you did this and you had a difficult time, and I recognize that, and I think it's really impressive on how well you did, even though you had those challenges, instead of just focusing on the end result, which of course can still make them feel good, but in the next project, that's only the thing they're chasing.
And before we get into our rapid fire questions, or more rapid fire, I know sometimes we've talked a lot today about being, you know, more self-aware, pulling yourself out of kind of thought spirals, or turning pain into purpose. But if there's someone listening to this right now who someone very close to them in their life, whether it's a family member or a friend, is going through a tough time, what would be your advice to that person on how we can be there for others in the best way possible during a tough time? Because those can be such tricky situations to navigate.
Yeah, I think honestly, it depends on the nature of the tough time. A common mistake I think I see people making, especially young folks, is to assume responsibility for things that they are not in a position to manage, and that they may inadvertently make worse, honestly. And so, for instance, a lot of the stuff that we as clinicians do to treat self-harm and suicidality is very counterintuitive. We don't necessarily swoop in with a lot of reassurance following certain behaviors and stuff like that. And so the best thing you can do is figure out, like, what is my zone? What's my lane? Okay. Like if it's just to cheerlead and say like, you've got this, I can do that. I can point them in the direction of other resources, and probably that's going to be the thing I should focus on. Or if it's just, you know, kind of low level stuff, then it's just as easy as like, what would I want to hear in this situation? Right? Like, what how have I been here before, and what did I need at that time? But if it feels like they're pulling for more than you, like you feel scared for them, you feel like they need you in order to be safe or okay or get through the night or get through the loss or the breakup or whatever, that is not of service to them. You're not being a good friend if you feed into that dynamic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I feel like it's also important to kind of realize how close you are to them. Like if it's your sibling, or if, you know, this is your child, that's going to be a different relationship that you have. Or if it's, you know, not your best friend at school, but someone that you sit with at lunch, or if it's the closest family friend that you've ever had that you feel like you're almost siblings, you're going to have a different dynamic, and that's going to be a different way that you're going to help them.
Kind of taking a step back to really realize the person, the situation, and your role in it, and maybe how you've even encountered it for yourself or in other means, I think is also a good step.
Yeah, it's about being thoughtful, not reactive. I mean, crisis plunges us into reactivity, which is the worst thing for everybody involved. And so either during that crisis or soon thereafter, pulling back and looking at the big picture is like the compass you need to navigate that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if there is a teen right now who's listening to this and is perhaps interested in going into the world of psychology, what would be your starting advice for their first step?
If you're a teenager, I would just I would start honestly with classes. Like I'm talking if your high school has like a psych class or an AP psych class, because really there's no path to this career that doesn't include education. And frankly, a lot of what goes into these careers and what's required to obtain them is through education. And if you're not interested in the material, if it doesn't capture you or sing to you, then you want to figure that out sooner rather than later. So as obnoxious as it sounds, I would actually really encourage an academic kind of emphasis or focus if that's something you're considering.
That's a great tip because, especially as you said, like it's important to know whether that kind of captures you. Maybe we're interested in psychology, but you know, reading a book or listening to a podcast fills that for us rather than studying and reading textbooks. Like there's kind of different varying levels of that. So it's good to figure that out. A fun question that we have for you is if you could instantly master any random skill, this has nothing to do with psychology, but juggling, salsa dancing, cooking the perfect souffle, anything else, what would you choose?
Improv comedy. I love comedy. I particularly like stand-up, but I think the ability to be like really good at improv it gives you the power to diffuse just about any situation. Like you talk about like a superpower, man, that is it. So that would be my hands down.
Oh my gosh,
Absolutely,
I didn't think of that, but you know what? I agree because I think it's like such a skill to have and something that I've never really met too many people who are good at like saying the right thing at the exact right moment and like everyone can kind of resonate.
Those people who are just so funny and they just come up with those funny things on the spot. It's just...
And they're like relevant,
absolutely. Like it's not just like a joke, but it's like just a situational comment that just makes everyone die laugh.
Like we all want to be around somebody who makes us smile. And I think there is no greater joy than seeing somebody genuinely light up in response to something you said. And so, I don't know, I think if you've got that power, that's a lot.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. And
so what is one piece of advice that you would wish that you would give to your teenage self?
Oh man. I think it would be along the lines of what we've discussed. So stop waiting for someone to figure you out. That's probably not going to happen. And don't let your suffering be for nothing. It will become self-destructive if you don't use it in a way that is constructive.
I love that. That is so powerful. And such a good reminder, I think, for everyone is like, no matter what you're going through, make the most out of every situation and experience possible.
Yeah, Thich Nhat Hanh, this great Zen Buddhist master would say, like, suffering is the soil, you know, from which flowers sprout. And I've I think that is a mindset. I think you have to really embrace that as reality and not just like, a poster on your wall. Like that just needs to be your true north. And if it is, life is going to be a lot more fulfilling and a lot easier to manage.
Totally, 100%. I love that saying, and I think that is a mindset, definitely not just a little quote. And one thing that we always like to end off with is, what brings you a small bit of happiness?
Oh my God, so many things. The most consistent for me is working outside. So we've got like this little pavilion out in my back, and like it brings me not a small bit of happiness. It brings me consistent happiness to just hear the birds, especially when I'm working on something that feels stressful and overwhelming, is just to like be rooted in nature and grateful for the opportunity to, have access to it. I'm in California, so it's like really sweet, and I don't take it for granted.
Oh
That's
my gosh.
amazing.
Incredible. And where can our audience find you if they want to keep up and learn more about you?
Sure. I'm on social media at Dr. Caroline Fleck. You can check out my website, drcarolinefleck.com, where I have a bunch of content and behind the scenes stuff for the book. And of course, you can find my book wherever you get book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Audible, you name it.
Incredible.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so insightful. We've learned so much and got a lot of actionable takeaways, which we always love. So yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, ladies.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, and thank you so much to Dr. Caroline Fleck for joining us today.
I mean, her story is so empowering. The pain that she's been through and the purpose that she's created is just so meaningful. Anastasia, what was your biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway is definitely that, we're all going to go through negative situations, whether it is breast cancer or depression like she went through, or maybe we're just having a bit of a hard time at school, or we're stressed out about a test. But we can channel all of that energy, and after we feel it to the fullest, we can then channel that into something more positive so we can build up ourselves and the people and animals around us.
Totally.
How about you?
I love that. And one of the biggest things that I learned from Dr. Fleck today is the difference between external validation versus praise. And I think so often, like she was saying, we mesh those two up together, but it's so fascinating to me how actually external validation is essential to us as humans to feel happy and fulfilled and connected and like we belong. But praise is kind of, something that is fleeting and that we're always going to be trying to mold ourselves into a better version to get more praise, but not actually fulfill ourselves. And I think that's an important distinction. If you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Caroline Fleck, we think you would love our podcast interview with Sonia Lubomirski, a top author and professor at the University of California, Riverside. With Sonia, we talk all about actionable and tangible ways to feel happier daily, how and why you should connect with loved ones, plus some of her most fascinating findings as a happiness researcher.
People think that they shouldn't ask kind of quote nosy or intrusive questions because they feel like they're going to be quote nosy or intrusive, but actually others, it's we all kind of want to like to talk about ourselves, so we should ask questions that are more deep.
You can listen to our interview with Sonia Lubomirski. It's linked in the show notes.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to follow the podcast so that you don't miss a single episode, and also it really helps us out and supports us. See you next time!